Thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, there it is. This is a strange topic. We've heard these days that you should try to favor competition and try to bring competition to the Philippine market. That's probably a purpose competition authorities would like to hear. And energy regulators also have those kind of mandates. But this issue, reliability, brings a different mandate. It's a long-term mandate trying to, I would say, bring investment for the electric system. Having sufficient offer, supply, both in a long term in order to answer situations of lack of offer, but also short-term contingencies. Why should we talk about this? Well, first of all, this is the EPDP, no? In its section 2, the declaration of policy, it clearly states that, well, it is declared that it's the policy of the state to ensure and accelerate total electrification. Great, excellent first mandate, but also to ensure quality, reliability, security, and affordability. That's the difficult part, but of supply of electric power. So that's where reliability, it's in the mandate of the authority. It's a declaration of policy, and it's a similar mandate we have in Chile. I mean, in Chile it's been a discussion, it's almost a philosophical discussion, because competition is clearly straightforward, but talking about reliability or ancillary services is more philosophical and not that easy to understand. And the problem is that sometimes it's expensive, and that's a tough part. If you want to have a reliable system, probably you're going to have a more expensive system. That's it. That's something I learned today. Also, there's problems with the presentation too. I don't know, but there also, if you take a look at the definitions of the EPDP law, reliability appears, ancillary services appear, and the mandate of the wholesale operator states that it has to deal with ancillary services. So also in the law, in the EPDP law, this issue is a matter of concern. Yesterday, to the ones that were present, I was talking about how the Chilean electrical system happens, and its characteristics. One of the characteristics is that they have different kinds of electric generation units. So these units have different characteristics. Some of them have a lot of load capacity. Some of them are very regular. Geothermal is not the case, but solar and wind are. So are you going to pay them something? Are they going to receive any payments for their capacity, for being there, we would say? And also a situation of concern is, well, carbon taxes and all these climate change policies could affect also ancillary services or reliability. That's a different issue. I was mentioning yesterday that the key facts of the regulation in Chile try to promote several issues, but one of them was try to promote private investment, or in general investment, not only private, but also could be public investment. So how can you promote this kind of investment? How can you favor that certain generation units remain in the system and are not taken away to other systems, such as diesel units that can be moved from different systems? How can you retain them? Well, you can retain them through capacity payment. That's a possibility, and you should consider them if you are only paying them through energy and capacity, which is the case for Chile for a long time. Well, this is where something happened. This is where the period definitions I was mentioning, ancillary services, the central dispatch, and the grid code, which you have considered this issue. The grid code, whether it's a different name, but we also have a certain of a grid code I will tell you later. It considers how you operate a safe and reliable operational system. Well, these are the two traditional products, I would say. Energy and power are traditional products, but in the late 90s, a discussion started to happen. Do we have different services that are offered in electrical systems? And suddenly, in the late 90s, especially in the UK, the discussion started talking about ancillary services and dealing with reliability. We don't only need a competitive system, but also we need a reliable system. Not only low prices, but sufficient supply. The discussion in Chile started in the early 80s. I was talking about competition, but we should also try to bring more investment. In the mid-80s, when the central dispatch was created, an executive order, a rule issued by the government, mentioned a different product. It was a product not mentioned in the law. Energy was clearly stated in the law, but what is called in Spanish potencia firme, or peak power price, appeared as a new product. It was created in a rule, and this brought a lot of tension for exposed tension with private parties. But in those days, we didn't have privatization yet, so state-owned firms knew what to do, and there was also planning made by the National Energy Commission. So in those days, there was not much of a discussion regarding how to pay capacity. But in the late 90s, new regulation issued by the government changed the concept of capacity payment. And that's when conflicts arise, because also privatization had occurred, and private parties also start to wanted profit. So it was clearly known how you would pay, how you receive your energy payments, but capacity payments and what capacity was a different story. It was more of it seemed to be, to the engineers, it seemed more like a philosophical or legal dispute instead of an engineering dispute. What is affordability? What is reliability? Sorry. The new regulation almost 20 years ago led to high conflicts between parties in the two largest electric systems. As I was mentioning, it was almost a philosophical dispute. I still recall having sort of hearings in the energy regulator in the early 2000s, and well, it was almost listening to philosophers. Also, internal regulations at the central dispatch changed, so there was a big conflict for what was this capacity payment going to be, considering also specific characteristics of each electrical system. In this discussion, there was clearly no legal standing to regulate to the regulator or to even to a dispute resolution body. There were no laws dealing with these capacity payments or reliability. I was telling you there were a high level of conflicts that went to the court, even to the Supreme Court, and this commercial interest affected reliability and an efficient supply in the system. If you don't know what is the amount of money you're going to receive, you may decide to move your generation companies to a different system. That's the conflict we had in the early 90s. So if you're trying to promote investment, long-term investment, which is something you're looking for, well, then you have to create incentives so they stay. But generators didn't want it. They wanted short-term profits, as people normally usually do. The basic principles of the regulation were, well, there was a marginal price of energy clearly known, not much discussion there, some discussion but not much, but capacity payment was something that was unclear. Therefore, in the early 2000s, after this philosophical discussion and the Ministry of Economy was a dispute settler in those days, settled two discussions of capacity payments, well, certainly a need to have a legal reform that clearly settled or established a framework, a legal framework for ancillary was needed. So, recognizing this discussion in some South American countries and in the UK, the need to regulate in the law ancillary services was seemed clear, but how can we do it and if we did it, seems very interesting. So a decision to incorporate these concepts in the law appeared, but there were, and there still are, some different characteristics between the two largest electric systems, which are tending to get interconnected in the near future. One of them is in the north, which is a system that has very few agents. They are concentrated. They are large mining companies, and on the other hand, the agents that are supplying them are also concentrated. And the transmission system is not well designed, so it had conflicts and it had problems. It's a well-known case. We had a primary election going in the country almost more than 20 years ago, and in the primary election day, a blackout appears, and a blackout affects all the system, the north system. It lasted more than a day, 27 hours. Mining companies, which are the providers, they are big exporters, and they provide a lot of income for the government. Well, we're very angry with the dispatch operator. How can we have a system if we are going to have a blackout of more than 24 hours, 27 hours? They were very angry. So they started first to intervene the dispatch operator, trying to change the manager of the dispatch operator. They were able to do that. But some of the mining companies decided, well, we're going to invest in more reliable system. Even if it's not paid, we're going to invest. Which was our process, our mining process, cannot stand 24 hours without energy, without electricity. So they decided to invest with the promise that the law that was starting to be discussed in the early 2000s was going to settle the situation and was going to clearly determine who was going to pay and who was also forced to have these services. Well, that was the case of the system in the north. Therefore, the law in 2004 created and distinguished both capacity payment and ancillary service market. With the capacity payments, the first discussion was, well, if we will always have these payments dealt in a regulation, why cannot we continue with these payments and the framework be settled in a internal regulation? Well, but that discussion was settled easily. But therefore, the framework for capacity, general framework, was settled in the law, trying to focus on long term was the capacity, but the methodology was going to be established in a regulation. Well, for the mining companies that had made a big investment in ancillary services, this seemed okay. The promise was, after the law, the regulation was going to be discussed pretty soon. So in 1 or 2 years' time, they were going to have the regulation and they were going to receive the payments for the ancillary services they have contracted. That was the promise. Guess what happened? No. On the other hand, ancillary services market, there was also the need to define this concept of ancillary services. What were the traditional ancillary services that were serviced in electricity markets? Also, the regulation was going to determine the methodology and the specific services that were going to receive payments. No? It was also recognized that the management and the operation of these services was going to be determined by the system operator. The system operator also was going to determine whether a generation company, transmission companies, even large consumers or distribution companies needed or were ordered to have ancillary services established for their procurement. This is an easy diagram that shows, in this concept at least, that was how it was interpreted in Chile for a while, how in the large concept of reliability, 3 other concepts arrived. No? Adequacy, and adequacy was financed through capacity payments. On the other hand, safety, a short-term urgency, thank you, and that was paid through ancillary services, and other products such as quality, distinguishing from commercial quality, supply quality, and product quality. So you need to, if you want to have all this, if you want to have a reliable system, well, you have to pay. It's not only amount of bids, you also have to have probably long-term bids, long-term contracts, but you want to have some units that have certain attributes that bring this or have this characteristics, but you have to recognize different payments to them. Well, the law was issued in 2004. Everybody was really happy, especially the transmission company. That's a different story. But on the ancillary services and reliability, everyone was expecting the regulation. Well, a technical regulation was issued quite easily. That was in 2006. External consultants worked on it, and they established a really high level of quality. It seemed that everybody was really happy with this, but guess what happens when you establish a really high level of standard of quality? Well, costs start to go up. In 2006, a regulation was enacted by the government dealing with power transfer. That was going back capacity payments. So a regulation dealing with capacity payments was established, but in a provision it said that, well, this regulation is not going to be fully implemented until the ancillary services regulation is enacted. Well, that was 2006. It seemed pretty easy, straightforward, but these new regulations, the effect of this regulation was, well, we're going to see some millions of dollars going from one business to another business. So let's better keep the status quo. Well, the ancillary services regulation was issued, well, many years later, not 1 or 2, almost 6 years later. And actually it was issued in the 31st of December of the 2012, so almost 7 years later. But the ancillary services regulation said, well, what we need to do to implement this regulation, we also need internal regulation from the dispatch operator, so it's something that is never going to happen. The dispatch operators issued internal regulations, and they were discussed at the expert panel, of course. So this showed that ancillary services, and especially reliability, is something everybody wants, but nobody wants to pay, and especially nobody wants to change its status quo. So that's part of the lessons to be learned here. Since the full implementation of the both regulations would start to change the status quo, nobody wanted to have it. Well, quite soon after this implementation, or the enactment of these regulations, a new discussion started to happen in Congress. Now, why don't we change the transmission regulation? It hasn't been working properly. And why don't we also change the system operator? We bring to the dispatch more independence. Well, at least two issues were of concern in the affordability and ancillary services market. First of all, the firms, electricity firms, were and sometimes suppliers of technical equipment were very they were encouraging higher levels of quality. They were really promoting these high standards of quality. The highest, the better. The highest, the more expensive. That's a problem. And that had happened. But on the other hand, nobody was really enforcing this regulation. Who is supervising that the machines they say they're going to have are really built? Nobody. So that was a big problem and a very expensive problem. So until last year's law, it was quite easy to change the standard, and what was happening is the quality of service was going very high. It was very good, but well, nobody was really enforcing it. Not the energy regulator, nobody. Until, of course, a blackout occurred. But since that is not very common, nobody was really enforcing the law, and enforcing, in this case, the regulation. So suddenly something happened. I was advising at that time the government said, well, we should try to make this process of increasing or decreasing the levels of quality are transparent, public, and they have at least a cost-benefit analysis. And we're going to have a sort of a due process when we create or change the standards of quality. Because what is going to happen is, well, there's an incentive, of course, to increase the high levels of, go to the highest levels of quality. Nobody's paying it, nobody's enforcing it, but everybody's paying it. So the higher the quality, the higher the cost. And well, probably more reliable, but we're not sure about it. So why don't we try to make a public procedure of how this quality is established? And that is going on. So after this law was enacted, new levels of quality, it hasn't changed since 2006. If we go backwards, you'll see that 2006, the last version is last year, but the new version should go into this process to study if there really are benefits to the costs imposed to the consumers. On the other hand, another issue was, well, we need an expert body to settle disputes regarding capacity and ancillary services. So, and the expert panel, which is a dispute resolution body of energy conflicts, independent to the government, was going to hear both cases dealing with new rules and ancillary services, and the cost of ancillary services also. So this is the big dispute. It must be said that the process of the last, I would say, 20 years of regulation of ancillary services and affordability and capacity payments, especially in Chile, has been a situation with many conflicts, with many commercial conflicts between firms and also with the authority. The first conflicts, well, happened more than 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, when this new regulation was enacted, 1998 regulation, and AES, a well-known generation company, decided to present a lawsuit against the President of the Republic. That was very unusual, and said, well, this regulation is changing the quality of service, and we're not affected by this, and we don't want to be affected because we don't serve residential users. We only serve mining companies, so we're not a public service, we're not a public utility, so our contracts cannot be affected. Fortunately for the government, unfortunately for the firm, the government won, and the regulation was not changed. In 2001, a new ministerial ruling deciding a case of how the capacity payments was settled, and another generation company decided to file a lawsuit against the ministry. Again, fortunately, the ministry won, but it shows that conflicts with the government are often occurring. In 2002, competition authority starts to hear cases dealing with capacity payments. They reject this case, but it was an accusation brought by a private party saying that the largest generation company was not fulfilling its duty to an energy power auction that was ordered a couple of years ago. More recently, after changes in capacity payments, and especially ancillary services that are ordered to private parties, to large users, well, of course, these large users don't want to build these ancillary services, and they don't want to provide these services that are ordered by them by the dispatch operator. They have started to sue both the dispatch and the expert panel. This is the case of a state-owned firm that doesn't want to pay and that doesn't want to provide that service ordered by them, by the dispatch operator. They sued. They lost again, and this is strange. And more recently, and after the regulation of 2013 was issued, different internal rulings of the dispatch operators were promoted and were drafted, and again, most of them were challenged at the expert panel. And this is a commercial conflict, and it's an ongoing process. I have to make a statement. I have advised one of the parties, ANS. I've given a legal brief for them, but this is a case where ANS is suing the largest generation company, arguing that this generation company, when they have to declare technical limitations of the generation unit, they have lied to the system. That has been already proven to the energy regulator, and well, it has imposed a cost of, to the whole system, it's almost like $200 million. Only to this firm, it's a $70 million lawsuit, but minimum time operation services limitations were falsely stated to the system operator, and well, it's an ongoing commercial conflict. So we're going to have more of these conflicts. I'm not sure if the judge is going to understand this conflict. It's a lot of money for Chilean judges. It's usually these amounts of money are usually dealt in arbitrations. I checked last night how the conflict was going on, but it hasn't continued for a while. There is a pending decision of the jurisdiction of this judge, and if the case should be heard by the expert panel. Well, what is going on more recently is a change of regulations. Well, I'm not sure when it's going to be finally enacted. This is a last week draft issued by the energy regulator and proposing a new regulation of capacity payment and ancillary services. You are open to provide comments from the Philippines. Why not? Use Google Translator, and maybe you can provide excellent comments to it. The process is still open. It lasts for a couple of weeks. Well, one thing that has happened in my country is 20 years ago we have a bunch of 4-generation companies. Some of them were state-owned, and there wasn't a lot of dispute of competition even with the capacity payments. Now we have more than 100 companies, and some of them are willing to receive this payment. Some of them are only paid not the energy they provide. They don't provide energy, but some of them receive these payments and are expecting them. So the situation has changed, and probably this regulation is going to be enacted and is going to be implemented in the following years, not in 10 years' time. Something that did happen actually in the previous regulation, but this shows that affordability is really relevant when you're trying to change reliability standards. Now, you also want affordable system, not really. So if we went back to the first, let's go back to the first. That's it. To the first, you want to ensure all the security, reliability, but consider always affordability. You want to pay, you want the country to pay. If you have, this is going to affect a lot of the economy. This reliability sounds very strange, but it affects the cost of the whole economy. The incentives are clear to some of the parties to go to the best quality, the best reliability, but never forget affordability. Thank you very much. Sorry, I prepared something. You help me. No. Thank you very much.